Monday of the 30th week in Ordinary Time.
A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Romans. Brothers and sisters, we are not debtors to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For those who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you received a spirit of adoption, through which we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if only we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. The word of the Lord.
The responsorial psalm. The response is, Our God is the God of salvation. God arises, his enemies are scattered, and those who hate him flee before him. But the just rejoice and exult before God. They are glad and rejoice. Our God is the God of salvation. The Father of orphans and the defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling. God gives a home to the forsaken. He leads forth prisoners to prosperity. Our God is the God of salvation. Blessed day by day be the Lord, who bears our burdens, God who is our salvation. God is a saving God for us. The Lord, my Lord, controls the passageways of death. Our God is the God of salvation.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus was teaching in a synagogue on the Sabbath, and a woman was there who for 18 years had been crippled by a spirit. She was bent over, completely incapable of standing erect. When Jesus saw her, he called to her and said, "Woman, you are set free of your infirmity." He laid his hands on her, and she at once stood up straight and glorified God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant that Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, said to the crowd in reply, "There are 6 days when work should be done. Come on those days to be cured, not on the Sabbath day." The Lord said to him in reply, "Hypocrites! Does not each one of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his ass from the manger and lead it out for watering? This daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound for 18 years now, ought she not to have been set free on the Sabbath day from this bondage?" When he said this, all his adversaries were humiliated, and the whole crowd rejoiced at all the splendid deeds done by him. The Gospel of the Lord.
The first reading comes from Romans 8:12-17. Once again in this passage from the letter to the Romans, Paul insists that we have to make a choice between serving the flesh or serving the Spirit. Now, the flesh is not to be interpreted as a human body. The word used in Greek is sarx. Now, in the Gospel of John, sarx is not a negative word. Sarx simply means the incarnate flesh. But in the letters of Paul, sarx implies concupiscence, that which drags us down, our fleshiness, that which is opposed to the Spirit. We have to serve one. If we serve the flesh, then the wages of that are death. Because serving the flesh means we're living an isolated lifestyle, a life that has no intrinsic value within it, a meaninglessness, and that is already death. What does the Spirit say in our hearts? That God is Abba, Father. That God did not simply create us, but created us to be His children. How do we know that's true, that the Spirit is speaking in our hearts? Ask yourself, if you wanted God to say something to you, what would you want Him to say? Most of us would like to hear Him say, "I love you, I made you the way you are, don't worry about it, I can't think of living eternity without you." These things, where do they come from? If we created a God in our own image, that God would be very vindictive. The God who reveals Himself through the promptings of the Spirit in our heart is the God who is the response to our deepest aspirations, because it's the Spirit of God who placed those aspirations in our heart. Even though we are children of God, though, we have to suffer with Jesus. That if God's own Son suffered on the cross, then we have to be willing to share in that passion. Why is that? For whatever reason, suffering is a part of love, and possibly the most profound expression of love that we can have. Because when we suffer, we don't want to trust anyone. We want to isolate ourselves. But when we suffer with trust, then we destroy the power of suffering to isolate us. We, like Jesus, proclaim a creative word, a word of love that destroys the power of sin. Because the power of sin is isolation. By trusting, we've destroyed that power. The Gospel is from Luke 13, 10 to 17. Jesus heals a woman who is crippled on the Sabbath. And this is typical of the Gospel of Luke. Luke loves women. He often shows them to be an important part of the apostolate. Therefore, if Jesus heals a man who has a withered hand, he will also heal a woman on the Sabbath. Now, the leaders of the synagogue are angry because you're not allowed to heal someone on the Sabbath if that person isn't facing death. This woman has been crippled for 18 years. They're wondering why Jesus just doesn't wait till the next day. And Jesus' response, she's been crippled for 18 years. I won't make her wait another second. What is the response of those people? They're humiliated and they're very angry. They reject Jesus because he has done good. And isn't that cynical? Instead of celebrating the good he's done, they reject him for the very fact that he's done good. And may God bless us.